The night air over the western desert was bitter and dry, carrying the smell of dust, diesel, and something else: fear. It was late October 1942, and somewhere inside a dimly lit operations tent near the front, a gaunt and exhausted Field Marshal Erwin Rommel leaned over a radio transmitter. His uniform hung loose on his frame. Weeks of illness and exhaustion had carved lines deep into his face. Outside, the desert wind hissed against canvas. Inside, Rommel's voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. He said, "Berlin, listen carefully. If we do not reinforce immediately, if we do not receive fuel, the Afrika Korps will be destroyed." Static crackled, but his message was clear: a warning, a plea, and the last desperate signal before the storm of El Alamein erupted. What exactly did the Desert Fox tell Berlin? And why did no one listen? This is the true story, minute by minute, of Rommel's final warning before the Battle of El Alamein began.
The road to El Alamein. To understand Rommel's warning, we must first understand the desert he fought in. A land of heat-shimmered horizons, where mirages twisted reality and engines died in the sand, where men fought not only each other, but the sun, thirst, and the silence of an ancient world that cared nothing for their suffering. By mid-1942, Rommel had become a legend, the Afrika Korps, the man whose brilliant maneuvers had shocked the British again and again. He pushed the Allied armies across Libya, over the border of Egypt itself, and all the way to El Alamein, just 60 miles from Alexandria. Germany dreamed of a swift victory. Berlin celebrated. Propaganda posters showed Rommel as unstoppable. But the truth was different. The Afrika Korps was collapsing. Fuel convoys destroyed by British submarines, ammunition rationed to the last round, tanks that moved only when engines scavenged from wrecks allowed it, soldiers starving on AF rations. Meanwhile, the British Eighth Army, under new leadership from General Bernard Montgomery, was swelling with men, tanks, guns, and supplies brought from across the empire. The desert thundered nightly with the arrival of convoys. Rommel saw the truth clearly. He was outnumbered, outgunned, outsupplied, and if Berlin did not listen, he would be out of time.
The night before the storm, October 22, 23. Wind screamed across the desert like a living thing. It was the night of October 22, 23. Rommel, recovering from illness in Austria, had rushed back to Afrika after realizing that Berlin's promises meant nothing without his presence. When he arrived, he saw it instantly. Everything was worse than he feared. At the forward command post, his senior officers briefed him by lantern light. The shadows flickered across maps scattered with pins showing exhausted battalions and crippled divisions. General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma spoke softly, almost apologetically. "Field Marshal, the fuel reserves are gone. If we move our tanks even few miles, we may not get them back." Rommel rubbed his temples. His head throbbed. Nausea twisted his stomach. But he forced himself upright. "What about ammunition?" he asked. A silence. Colonel Fritz Bayerlein answered, "We have enough for 1 day of major fighting." 1 day. Yet Montgomery was preparing for weeks of relentless assault. The Desert Fox already knew what must happen next. Rommel ordered the radio operator to clear the line to Berlin. The tent fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant clatter of British artillery preparing positions. Then Rommel began his message. His voice was steady, but inside he burned with dread. To Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the situation here is critical. The enemy is receiving overwhelming reinforcements. We have no fuel, no ammunition, no reserves. Without immediate support, we cannot hold. He paused, breathing heavily. The officer beside him watched his hand tremble. Rommel continued, "If we do not receive at least 350 tons of fuel daily, we must retreat. If we do not retreat, the army will be annihilated." This was not exaggeration, not dramatics, not fear. It was a soldier's clear and rational truth. And then he said the words that Berlin would never forgive. "The enemy will break through. I cannot guarantee holding the front." Outside, a sandstorm whipped the desert. Inside, Rommel waited for a response. None came. Berlin sent back a message hours later, a message that stunned even Rommel's hardened officers. "Stand fast. Victory is certain. The Führer expects success." Montgomery's attack was now hours away.
The British preparation, meanwhile. While Rommel warned Berlin, the Eighth Army was preparing the most carefully scripted battle of the Desert War. At their own headquarters, Montgomery stood before his officers. He pointed to the map, tapping the German line. "Gentlemen, this is not a battle of maneuver. This is a battle of attrition. We will smash Rommel's line piece by piece until it collapses." His strategy was simple: overwhelming artillery, methodical advance, deception operations, cutting Rommel's supply line. British sappers laid tapes across the desert floor to guide tanks by night. Artillery guns repositioned. Radio units broadcast fake messages to mislead German intelligence. At dusk, British soldiers whispered final instructions under the glow of hooded lamps. Chaplains moved among them, offering quiet prayers. Mechanics tightened bolts on Sherman tanks. Drivers tested engines one last time. They all knew, when the barrage began, the desert would shake. 23rd October, the battle begins. 2140, the first shock. At precisely 2140, the stillness shattered. A blinding flash ripped across the horizon. Then another, and another. 1,000 guns spoke at once. The ground trembled like an earthquake. Rommel, still inside his tent, felt the blast wave roll through the sand. His officers staggered as dust poured from the rafters. The Battle of El Alamein had begun. Outside, the sky pulsed with fire. Searchlights sliced the darkness. Dust clouds rose like pillars. German troops rushed to positions, coughing on smoke and powder. Radio operators shouted as signals from forward units came flooding in. "Enemy artillery, massive, cannot see the horizon. Minefields breached at several points. British armor advancing, Shermans and Grants." Rommel stared into the night, his throat tight. This was the storm he warned about, and Berlin had left him alone to face it. The first night, a labyrinth of fire. The British assault targeted the northern sector, where Rommel's defensive belts were supposedly strongest. But Montgomery had studied every map, every ridge, every dune. His plan was cold, methodical, relentless. Infantry moved through minefields illuminated by flares. Engineers crawled through the sand, clipping wires and clearing paths under machine gun fire. Tanks rumbled forward behind them. For the German and Italian defenders, the night became a maze of fire and smoke.
A German machine gunner named Hans Müller recalled, "The ground glowed red. We couldn't hear our own rifles. It felt like the end of the world." Italian bersaglieri fought desperately to hold their trenches. Their officers shouted over the roar, "Hold the line! Hold the line!" But British artillery hammered them without mercy. Rommel rushed from point to point, often standing fully exposed to enemy fire, barking orders, directing counterattacks, dragging wounded men to cover. His staff begged him to take shelter. He refused. "If my men are out there, I will be out there too." 24 October. The struggle intensifies. By dawn, smoke blotted out the horizon. The desert smelled of burning oil, hot metal, and explosives. Flies gathered instantly on the fallen. The Afrika Korps counterattacked, but many tanks ran out of fuel before reaching the front. Some crews abandoned their machines, cursing, kicking the sand. Rommel slammed his fist on the hood of a staff car. "Where is the fuel promised by Berlin?" His aide answered quietly, "It never left Greece, sir. The RAF destroyed the convoy." Rommel closed his eyes. He had known it, but hearing it confirmed broke something inside him. Montgomery's advance was slow but unstoppable. British engineers widened the passages in the minefields. Artillery continued pounding. The pressure increased by the hour. 26 October. Rommel's desperation. On the fourth day, Rommel sent another message to Berlin. This time, there was no diplomacy, no restraint. Only a commander watching everything he built collapse. "Our losses are severe. The soldiers are at the limit of their endurance. We must withdraw to Fuka, or risk total destruction." Berlin's reply was immediate. "Withdrawal is forbidden. You will hold your position." Rommel stared at the message, cold fury rising in his chest. "How," he whispered, "do they expect us to fight, without fuel, without ammunition, without air support?" He struck the table, scattering papers and knocking over a lantern. His officers watched him silently. They had never seen the Desert Fox look defeated. 28 to 31 October. The climax. Operation Supercharge. Montgomery prepared the final blow. British armored brigades massed for a decisive breakthrough. Artillery barrels glowed red-hot. Aircraft roared overhead. At 1 a.m. on November 2nd, the barrage began. This would be the moment Rommel feared. British tanks stormed through the thinning Axis line. The 9th Armored Brigade suffered horrific losses, but they opened the gap Montgomery needed. German tanks fought back fiercely, but many ran out of fuel mid-battle, crews forced to flee under fire. General von Thoma himself was captured, saluting his British opponents with dignity. When he met Montgomery, he said, "You have won a glorious victory." Meanwhile, Rommel stood on a ridge, binoculars shaking in his hands. He watched the battlefield swirl. Burning tanks, men running in every direction, smoke rising like a curtain, the roar of engines and screams of wounded. It was over. There would be no miracle, no breakthrough, no last-minute reinforcements from Berlin. This was the destruction he had warned them about. Resolution. Rommel's final report. On November 3rd, Rommel sent a final message to Hitler. For the first time, he was blunt, almost harsh. Quote, "The army is faced with annihilation. German and Italian units are exhausted. We must retreat. I will not sacrifice my men in a hopeless situation." End quote. Hitler replied, quote, "I forbid retreat. The army will fight where it stands." End quote. Rommel read the message aloud to his staff. Then he folded it slowly
placed it on the table, and said, "I will retreat. If Hitler wishes to shoot me, he may do so after the war." The Afrika Korps began withdrawing westward. Thousands would escape. Thousands would not. But Rommel saved what he could. He disobeyed orders to save lives.
Perhaps the most symbolic moment of all came on June 21, 1940. Hitler arrived at the forest of Compiègne, the exact location where Germany had signed its surrender in November 1918. The same railway carriage, the same clearing, the same humiliation, and now everything was reversed. When Hitler stepped out of the car and saw the monument to French victory of 1918, he stopped and stared. Witnesses described him as rigid, almost trembling with anger. Then he said, "This is where I will make France kneel." When he walked into the carriage, he refused to sit. Instead, he stood exactly where the German delegation had once stood during the 1918 armistice. He listened to the reading of the terms without expression. Then when the reading ended, Hitler walked out without shaking a single hand. He said outside, "This is the greatest moment of my life." Afterward, he ordered the monument to French victory to be blown up. The past, he believed, had finally been rewritten.
The public speech. What he said to the world. On July 19, Hitler delivered a speech to the Reichstag, speaking publicly for the first time after France's collapse. For many Germans listening on the radio, this was the moment they had dreamed of since the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler proclaimed, "I have only done what countless generations before me longed to do. I have broken the chains of Versailles." He described France as a power shattered forever. And then he turned to Britain, saying, "I call upon Mr. Churchill to end this war. If he refuses, the responsibility for the destruction of his empire will be his alone." To the public, this sounded like magnanimity. To his generals, it was a threat. To historians, it was the moment the Second World War moved into a new phase.